Some people you see every day aren't really alive. Their bodies move, they speak, they smile, but the consciousness that once belonged to them is gone, trapped somewhere you cannot reach. And the worst part? It can happen to anyone. It almost happened to me last month when I was invited to meet my girlfriend's family. I've spent days trying to make sense of it. What happened to me is real, and I need you to stay with me through this story, because once it starts, you'll understand just how dangerous normal can be, and why being invited somewhere is sometimes the beginning of a nightmare you can't wake up from. Her name was Lena Whitmore, and before that weekend, I believed she was the most open-minded person I had ever met. We'd been together for 5 months, long enough for comfort, not long enough for history. She said it was time I met her family. A simple weekend visit at their countryside estate. They'll love you, she promised, squeezing my hand like reassurance was something physical she could transfer. I'm a documentary photographer. I make a living observing people who don't realize they're being observed. It's a useful skill, and sometimes a curse, because from the moment we turned onto the long gravel driveway leading to the Whitmore estate, something felt staged. The house sat beyond acres of open land and dense tree lines, isolated in a way that felt deliberate. No neighboring homes, no passing traffic. My phone signal dropped to 1 bar, then nothing. Lena laughed when I mentioned it. "We like our privacy," she said. The way she said it felt practiced. 2 staff members stood waiting at the entrance before we even parked. They smiled warmly, too warmly. Their eyes didn't wander the way most people's do when meeting someone new. They assessed, measured, calculated. Inside, the house smelled faintly of polish and something metallic beneath it. The walls were lined with portraits of past generations, all poised, all composed, all watching. As one of the staff reached for my bag, our hands brushed. His skin was warm, his grip firm, but his eyes held mine a second too long. Dinner was held in a grand room with floor-to-ceiling windows, polished oak floors, and a chandelier that threw fractured light across the long table. Lena's father, Dr. Malcolm Whitmore, welcomed me with a calm smile. "Adrian, it's a pleasure to finally meet you," he said, extending a hand. I shook it. The conversation began innocuously, small talk, hobbies, photography. Then the questions shifted, subtly but unmistakably, into assessment disguised as charm. "Your eyesight must be exceptional for your line of work," he said, leaning slightly forward. "Strong reflexes, I imagine. Any family history of neurological conditions?" Each inquiry felt like a test rather than curiosity, and every compliment carried a weight I couldn't measure. I tried to focus on my meal, on my camera bag by my side, anything to ground myself. But then my eyes caught the portraits lining the walls. Faces of Lena's past partners stared back at me. None of them smiled genuinely. None of them were still present in her life. And then, a flash of movement. One staff member paused, barely noticeable, muttered, "Leave," almost imperceptibly. I blinked and it was gone. I told myself I was imagining it. Everything here was probably normal, polished, controlled. Yet the feeling of being measured, evaluated, and watched settled over me like a shadow. I couldn't shake it. Something about this house, this family, was wrong, but I had no proof. The next morning, Dr. Whitmore invited me into his study under the guise of helping me relax before the gala events. The room was warm, book-lined, and oddly silent except for the faint ticking of an antique clock. He motioned for me to sit in a high-backed chair, his voice soft, measured, almost melodic. "Sometimes, Adrian, the mind needs to rest, to let go of tension. Would you like to try?" I nodded hesitantly, unsure why the hair on my neck stood upright. He instructed me to close my eyes and focus on his voice. The tone was steady, rhythmic, hypnotic. I felt my shoulders loosen, my eyelids grow heavy. And then, the sensation began. A subtle tilting, a backward pull, like falling through nothing while still upright. My awareness detached from my body. I could see it seated in the chair before me, calm, obedient, answering questions I wasn't consciously speaking. My voice, my hands, my movements, all out of reach. Panic surged, but I couldn't move. I could only observe. I was fully conscious, yet utterly powerless. Every thought screamed inside me, and still, the body I had lived in my whole life continued to exist as if I were a spectator at a theater of my own life. Dr. Whitmore's voice continued, soft and instructive. I understood, too late, that this was not meditation. It was control. He had opened the door to what he later referred to casually as the quiet chamber. A private exile where the mind is trapped, watching without influence, while the body remains accessible to another presence. When I finally blinked awake, the session seemed over. The world was normal again. Dr. Whitmore smiled politely. Lena appeared in the doorway, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Just a little relaxation exercise," she said. "Nothing to worry about." But I remembered. Every second. The sinking, the darkness, the helpless observation. And I knew with a cold certainty that this weekend had begun something irreversible. Something I could sense but not yet name. By evening, the estate had transformed. Guests arrived in sleek cars, dressed in tailored suits and elegant gowns. Their smiles were polite, practiced, but something about the way they studied me, Adrian Cole, outsider, observer, set my nerves on edge. Every glance felt measured, evaluated, as though I were an exhibit rather than a guest. In the garden, an elegant easel stood beneath soft lantern light. A framed photograph of me from earlier that morning rested upon it. I blinked. Someone had taken the liberty of presenting me to the attendees. I began to realize that I was not merely attending the gala. I was more than a visitor. I was a commodity, and the gala was not a social gathering. It was an auction in which I was the prize. The feeling settled in my chest, cold and insistent. I was being observed in ways I could not counteract, studied by eyes that had done this countless times before. And by the end of the evening, I sensed the sinister weight of being the object of it. The weekend, I realized, was no ordinary visit. Curiosity and fear clawed at me all night. By the early hours, I found myself wandering the estate alone. That's when I noticed the hidden door behind a large tapestry in the library, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. My pulse quickened as I reached for the handle. The stairs spiraled down into darkness. At the bottom, the corridor widened into a room bathed in fluorescent light, clinical and sterile. Stainless steel tables lined the walls, machines hummed quietly, and charts, meticulous, medical, and disturbing, covered every surface. Names, dates, and photographs of missing people stared back at me, each image more familiar than I wanted to admit. The realization hit me like ice water. These were the partners Lena had introduced me to over the years. None were free. None were alive in the way they had once been. A monitor flickered to life, revealing a video. A man struggled in a chair while a calm voice narrated the procedure, as though lecturing a classroom. Electrodes, neurological mapping, precision control. The screen captured the transition in excruciating clarity. The man's consciousness flickered, then receded, leaving the body responsive but inhabited by someone else. My stomach turned. The quiet chamber was no longer theory. It was real. Every polite smile, every measured gesture, suddenly made sense. The gala, the questions, the appraisal, all of it led here, to the underground heart of the operation. The Whitmores didn't just host dinners. They selected, they harvested, they preserved. They called it continuance. And I, Adrian Cole, was next. I stumbled backward through the sterile corridors, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. And then I found Lena, waiting at the bottom of the stairs, her face calm, almost apologetic. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly, her voice melodic but empty. "It's not safe." I demanded answers. "What is this place? What are you doing?" She tilted her head, studied me, and for a long moment I thought she might lie, might deny everything. But she didn't. Her confession was quiet, almost casual. "You'll still exist," she said, "just not in control." My stomach dropped. Before I could react, she moved quickly, producing a syringe filled with a pale liquid. Panic surged, but the next thing I knew, my vision blurred, and I collapsed into unconsciousness. My body went limp, but the horror persisted. I was aware, fully aware, trapped inside myself, watching as the very person I trusted administered my descent into something I could not yet name. When I regained partial consciousness, Lena stood to the side, expression neutral, just the quiet, unnerving assurance that this betrayal was inevitable. I tried to move, tried to scream, tried to resist, but my body remained a stranger, my limbs unresponsive. The quiet realization settled over me like a shroud. The person I loved had not saved me. She had delivered me into the hands of something far darker. The room smelled sharply of antiseptic, metal, and something faintly sweet. I was strapped to the surgical chair, my wrists and ankles secured, my chest pressed to the cold leather. Dr. Whitmore moved around me with the calm precision of a conductor guiding an orchestra, speaking in his soft, deliberate voice, as though lecturing a class rather than performing an unspeakable act. Consciousness, he explained, is electrical, and electricity can be redirected. I tried to protest, but my mouth opened and closed uselessly. My body was no longer mine. The quiet chamber began to engulf me. Darkness pressed from all sides, silent and absolute. I was still conscious. Suddenly, memory flashed back to the staff member's brief glitch during the gala, the whispered warning, the camera flash that had startled him. Instinctively, I focused on that memory. Sensory recall surged. The sound of metal clinking, the brightness of the flash, the smell of the estate's polished floors. My body twitched. Just a small spasm at first, then more, fighting against the restraints. The machinery whined, sparks flickered, and the electrodes lost their grip. Chaos erupted as Dr. Whitmore's calm veneer cracked ever so slightly. With a strength I didn't know I possessed, I forced my body into convulsions, breaking free from the restraints just enough to push over a tray of equipment. Fire ignited from exposed wires, spreading quickly through the suite. Smoke filled my lungs, stinging, choking, but it was freedom. I scrambled toward the stairwell, dragging myself through the chaos. I burst into the night, the cool air hitting my face like a promise of life. Behind me, the estate erupted into smoke and flame, the underground facility collapsing in a final, catastrophic gesture. I ran, not looking back. I stumbled through the forest as the first pale light of dawn touched the treetops. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop. I had escaped. I was alive. But the quiet chamber whispered faintly in the corners of my mind, reminding me that survival was only partial. The police investigation was quick, perfunctory. The fire had destroyed most of the underground facility. Financial records showed nothing illegal. The Whitmore estate was officially abandoned, a casualty of accident or neglect. The world continued, oblivious to the horror I had narrowly evaded. Months later, I thought I had moved on. I attended a public charity event in the city, a glittering gathering of wealthy donors and polished smiles. I told myself it was safe, that the estate was gone, that the Whitmores had vanished. But then I saw him. Across the room, standing among the crowd, Dr. Malcolm Whitmore. Younger, vital. His eyes scanned the room with the same calm precision I had learned to fear. And then they landed on me. He smiled subtly, almost imperceptibly. No words, just the tilt of his head, the raise of a champagne glass. The same measured, polite attention that had haunted me during the gala. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that he was just a man, that I had survived. But the sensation persisted, subtle, insistent, and terrifying. The door to the quiet chamber had never fully closed. It never would. And the worst part was not that I had almost lost my body. The worst part was knowing that out there, someone else was being measured, evaluated, and sold, while I watched, helpless once again.
Thanks for sipping tonight's tale with Haunted Brew. Don't forget to subscribe, and sleep tight if you still can.